Truth is, Frank was a puzzle to me, preparing to take the vows of a priest. Even so, he couldn't resist visiting the shipyard in Belfast just to catch a glimpse of the gigantic hull taking shape. It required 3,000 men 2 years to build a Titanic. There were 3 million rivets in the hull alone. The pride of Belfast, she was for certain. Frank was fascinated by everything about her.
When Frank graduated in 1912, his uncle Robert gave him a grand surprise. A ticket for the first 2 legs of the maiden voyage of the Titanic. From Southampton to Cherbourg, then on to Queenstown, before she set out across the Atlantic. And that is how Frank came face to face with a decision that could have changed his whole life.
Once Frank was on board, he spent hour after hour exploring the ship, documenting what he saw through the lens of his camera. As he strolled the massive decks, he was happy as a lark, and he didn't know it, but he was capturing a bit of history that would soon disappear. His passion for photo taking caught the fancy of an American millionaire on board. So impressed was the man with the work Frank was doing that he offered to pay his passage for the remainder of the trip. He wanted Frank to document the entire maiden voyage. Now, who could resist an offer like that? Frank sent off a request to his superiors in Dublin asking permission. A response came back much sooner than he'd expected, but the tone of the message seemed a bit abrupt. "Get off that ship," was the gist of what was said. It was not the reply he was hoping for. What difference could postponing his vows a few more weeks make? This was history in the making. Any photographer's dream. Perhaps they simply feared that he would change his mind. No doubt about it, Frank faced a difficult choice.
Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me.
Father always said, it is no easy thing letting go of your dreams. At such times, the comfort of hymns is a welcome source of strength. Frank Brown got off the ship in Queenstown, taking his photographs with him. Obedience saved his life, as well as those priceless images. I picture Frank standing on the jagged shoreline, the surf churning at his feet, as he captured the last photograph ever taken of the Titanic.
Raise thou me heavenward, O power of my power.
In 1910, I felt like it was time to start my life. When you're coming of age and a Mormon, you can't help but think of serving a mission. A friend of mine was doing what he needed to do so he could go. Alma Sani. He was 19, same as me. Well, a far sight better than me, because I was sure of one thing: a mission was not for me. But danged if he didn't keep working on me until somehow, I don't really know how, I finally gave in. Before I knew it, we'd both been called to serve in Great Britain. Well, when it came time to come home, Alma was in charge of making the travel arrangements. he booked tickets on the Titanic. We were excited. But then I got delayed on my way to the port. I knew I wasn't going to make it, so I wired Alma and told him and the others to go without me. But Alma, he was always the spiritual one, had this strong impression that we should all travel together. He canceled every one of the bookings. He said, we come to England together and we shall go home together. That was that. Well, when we heard what happened to the Titanic, every one of us thanked Elder Sawney. But Alma put his hand on my shoulder and said, we all ought to be thanking Fred here. Because of him, we all missed the boat.
Ruth Becker had spent most of her young life in India. She'd gone there as a small child with her missionary parents. Ruth had seen so much of reality and sorrow in her young life. It might have been easy not to believe in a caring and loving God. But Ruth had also seen love at work. She had felt of her father's faith.
In 1912, my little brother Richard became very ill, and so Mother and I left for home, along with my sister and brother. Father was to stay behind until the following year. The Titanic was bigger than I had imagined, with lots to see and do. I would wheel Richard up and down the deck. I would look in the dining room, and it was the most beautiful sight I ever saw. It was new, absolutely new. How beautiful everything was. One night, we awoke to a different sound. The hum of the engines had stopped. The hallway outside of our cabin was full of people. We had to climb 5 flights of stairs. No one knew what was going to happen. When they said it was time to board the lifeboats, one steward picked up my brother and another my sister. Just as they lifted my little brother and sister into boat number 11, we heard someone announce, "That's all for this boat." Mother cried out, "Please, those are my children." I watched as she was almost pushed into the boat. Then a lifeboat dropped out of view. I will never forget the feeling that came over me. I'd been left behind. A young woman standing close to me was shivering in the cold. I offered her one of my blankets. She smiled. For a moment, it seemed that there might be hope. The next thing I remember was being lifted down into one of the last lifeboats.
Alone in the darkness, encircled by strangers, Ruth distributed the blankets, not even keeping one for herself. Later, she recalled that though the air around her was freezing, she felt she was wrapped in warmth.
Whenever you give of your time, which is part of your life, your love, which is part of your soul, to serve others, you are manifesting God's love to man. Everything is summed up in that.
Irene Corbett believed that each one of us has gifts inside. Not the kind you keep, the kind you give away. she was determined to use her gifts to improve the lives of others.
My grandmother Irene was a woman ahead of her time. Strong-willed, her husband Walter always said. Then one day, Irene unexpectedly announced to Walter that she wished to go to England in order to study and improve her nursing skills. He did not understand. Is this God's will or your own? In 1910, only half the babies born in the county where Irene lived survived a full year. Several local physicians who recognized Irene's abilities encouraged her to pursue training. The very best training available was in London. The matter became a topic of discussion among many in the small town. Truth was, Irene had made careful preparations for her absence. Her parents had agreed to take care of the children while she was away. Finally, Walter gave his consent. In November 1911, Irene left for London. Walter seemed brokenhearted. The next 6 months were difficult for both of them. The training itself was not what she had expected. Sometimes she worried that Walter's heart was broken. "We will soon be together again and all will be right, you'll see," she promised. When Irene finished her studies, she was recognized as the top of her class. April 1st, Irene sent a postcard telling her family how anxious she was to come home. So anxious that she had booked passage on the fastest ship in the world.
I'm in love with you.
It must have been an awful moment of truth for Irene when she realized the Titanic was sinking. She ached to take her place in the lifeboat. She longed to reassure Walter and the children how very much she loved them. She wanted to do the work she had prepared to do. But there were so many in need all around her. In that moment, Irene realized what she must do.
Irene Corbett was one of only 14 women in second class who did not survive.
Lead kindly light amid the encircling gloom.
What is it that causes ordinary people to do remarkable things?
Lead thou
A skilled physician with so much to offer the world helps his wife into a lifeboat, whispering simply,
is dark
"Be brave,"
and far from home.
then steps back and disappears into the ranks of ordinary men.
Lead thou me on.
An elderly member of Congress, urged to get into a lifeboat, insists on remaining on board with the other men. His wife, of many years, steps back herself. We've been together all these years. Do you think I would leave you now? Where you go, I go, she insists. And they stayed on the deck together.
Which I have loved.
A man, seeing others trapped in the rising water, offers himself as a human ladder, lifting them to safety. A woman of noble birth, a countess, of whom a crew member would say, "I was in command of the lifeboat, but I had to row."